Welcome back to AllTheMons. I'm Bumstar, and last episode we got our AE2 storage system set up and running, which already made a huge difference on how we manage all of our items. But we're still doing a lot of manual crafting, and that's about to change. In this episode, we're going to start setting up auto-crafting using AE2. This is going to let us automatically craft a ton of items we're constantly making, and it's going to be a massive step towards scaling everything in our world. The goal here is to get a solid auto-crafting system in place so we can start working towards better power generation, since that's going to require a lot of crafting moving forward. So, let's get started. In between episodes, I went ahead and replaced all the blocks in here, so it's just all stone for now. And then I added a bunch of crafting upgrades and added a bunch more of our drawers and compacting drawers and all of that around this area. So to get started, we're going to start making some molecular assemblers, ME pattern providers, and some crafting storage and co-crafting processors. So the first thing that we're going to need to make is some crafting units, and pretty simple. But we're going to go ahead and make 10 of these for now. And then we need to make 2 crafting co-processing units, and then we're going to do some crafting storage, and we're going to do the 4K ones. So we need 8 of the 4K storage components to get us going. We also need to make some pattern providers and molecular assemblers, and I went ahead and made 8 pattern providers and 8 molecular assemblers. You're going to need a lot of Certus quartz dust to craft these, so just make sure you have enough going into it. And then we're going to use the cables that we have here, and we're just going to connect them, kind of put them right here for now. These will be temporary setups because we're going to want to move them around. But to get this started, we can set this up with this to use it to craft more of everything that we need, so it'll just get easier and easier as we go. So first up, we're going to set up our molecular assembler and our pattern providers, and we're going to do that in a nice little square setup here, or rectangle setup. And the reason this setup works so well is because the molecular assemblers are now touching multiple different pattern providers. You know, this assembler here is touching 4 different pattern providers, where this one here is only touching 3, and that's fine, but the rest of them throughout here are all touching 4 or 3, which just allows us to speed up our crafting. And then with the pattern providers, this is where we're going to put our patterns, so that way we can start doing the auto crafting. And then over here, we're just going to set this up here. We're going to put our co-processing units down, and then we're just going to tower up with our crafting storage. And you want to make sure these aren't touching, so they're 2 separate things running, and connect them up with some cables. And now we have some crafting storage set up. And just double check to make sure that you have all the channels connected. These will light up red if you have too many channels going. These cables can hold 8 channels at a time, which means they can do 8 different things. So this tower, for example, is 8 channels total, because the pattern providers are counted as a channel. But these towers here, each one is only 1, because this is just considered 1 unit. So we have 1 and 2 on that cable, 8 on this cable, 3 on this cable because we have our crafting terminal, drive, and then our storage bus down there, and 1 on this because of our energy cell. And then the next thing we're going to need is the pattern encoding terminal, because we can't make patterns without some way to encode them. And all that's going to be is another crafting terminal with an engineering processor. So super easy to make. And we're just going to take our encoding terminal and we're going to place it right here. And it looks very similar. We have all of our items here, but now down here, instead of our crafting grid, we have the pattern encoder. So then we can take a pattern and put it in this slot here and tell it what to craft. And before we do any of that, we need to, well, craft a blank pattern. And then we want to take those blank patterns, put them in there. And now the first pattern that we want to teach you to do is to just make more blank patterns. It requires iron ingots, copper ingots, which are all things that we have set up, glowstone dust, which we have, Certus quartz crystals, which we have, but the quartz glass is something that we're not always going to have on us. So let's set up this pattern, and over here you can clear, you can turn substitutes on and off, and you can turn fluid substitutes on and off. Generally speaking, for my default, I always have substitutes disabled, and then I'll have fluid substitutes enabled. There will be times where you want to turn substitutes on, but for a pattern like this, you want to keep that disabled because of the quartz glass, because as we go to make a pattern for quartz glass, we don't want quartz glass to use quartz glass. we wanted to use regular glass. So we're just going to keep that off by default. You can turn that on and off at your own discretion. So we create the pattern by clicking there, and we now have the crafting pattern. So we can take that, place it in one of our pattern providers, and now the blank pattern is going to show up here with a plus next to it. If you click on it or use your middle mouse button, you'll get this window. With this window, we can now tell it how many blank patterns we want to craft. So let's tell it 10. You'll get this to come up as a crafting plan. And since we have CPUs, which are these towers, we should be able to craft it, except that we're missing quartz glass. We have everything else available, but we need that quartz glass. So what we're going to want to do is set up a pattern for quartz glass. And to do that, it's going to be glass and surface quartz dust. So when we add this pattern here, it's going to use regular glass, and you want to make sure this is set to regular glass, because like I said, if you turn substitutes on, it's going to try and use quartz glass or anything that's tagged with glass in the pattern. And you don't want it to do that because it can get stuck on itself. So turn that off and have glass in here with your surface quartz dust and create that pattern. So now if we come in here and we hit 10, it's now saying we're missing surface quartz dust. So then what we're going to want to do is set up a pattern for dust. At the top here, we're going to scroll over until we find the crusher, and we're going to set up a pattern for the crusher here. And we're going to tell it to use regular surface quartz instead of charged surface quartz, because either one works fine. But now it's going to send one surface quartz in for one dust. And now we have it. But if you see, this pattern has little pink lines on it. It's a processing pattern instead of a crafting pattern. So this pattern needs to go into a mechanism crusher, not a basic crafter. So for now, we're just going to place it down here, and we're going to place a pattern provider behind it. And we'll just go ahead and use some cables to connect to this point here to give it some power. And then we're going to connect this to our system. That way the pattern provider is online and connected. The crusher has power. And then we just want to come in and configure how we have this all set up. If you come in here, clear out the sides, turn auto eject on. Then you want to set input output to the pattern provider, which now means that the pattern provider can send items into this. And then when it's done crafting, it'll send them back into the pattern provider and it'll go right back into our system. So then we can take our surface quartz dust pattern and place it into our crusher. And now we're going to want to do the exact same thing with our furnace. So make sure to set the back to input output and auto input and auto output turned on. Connect to the pattern provider, make sure this is all connected. And now what we can do is we can set up a pattern for glass itself. So in order to make glass, we want to smelt sand. But in order to make sand, we need to crush down some gravel. And in order to get gravel, we want to crush down some cobblestone. And cobblestone is something that we have completely automated. So we essentially now have infinite glass. So we just come into our pattern encoder here, and let's go ahead and teach it how to make some gravel. Make sure it's set to cobblestone and gravel, but instead of doing a single cobblestone to turn to a single gravel, we want to set this by middle mouse clicking the cobblestone. And we're going to set that to 64 so it sends a stack in. And then we want to do the same thing for the gravel. So now it's showing that we send 64 cobblestone in to make 64 gravel. And then we want to do the exact same thing with the sand. And we're going to set both of these to 64. And then we come to the glass. And we want to show that when we put sand in, we make glass. And once again, let's go ahead and just set that to 64. So now come to your crusher and you're going to want to put the gravel and the sand in here. And for the furnace, we put the glass in there. And now we have glass automated. So we can hit this. And even if we tell it to craft 1, it's going to craft 64 because of how we have it set up. So we turn that on, and then let's come over here. And it is now smelting the sand, but make sure to turn splitting on to speed that process up. So if we take a look, we're now at 124 glass, which means if we come over to patterns and we come and request 10, it now shows us that we have everything. But we are going to need to craft 12 of the quartz glass. So it's going to do all of that. So go ahead and push start. You can hit up here to see the crafting status. And it's already done. We now have 10 extra blank patterns. And just like that, we've set up autocrafting at its very basic core. But what we did with the crusher and the furnace there is pretty much how you automate any machine. And then using these pattern provider towers, we can craft anything that's craftable in a crafting table. And the more of those towers that you have set up, the more space you're going to have for patterns, and the quicker everything's going to get crafted. And same thing with the CPU towers. The more of these that you have, the more crafts you'll be able to do, and the bigger crafts you'll be able to do. But before we go any further, we need to set up some things for Applied Energistics to make sure that we never run out of Certus quartz, Fluix dust, or Entro ever again. Because if we run out of any of those, we're in for a bad time. We're going to have to go through and go farm more to get it, but we can set it up so that way we never have to worry about it again. But before we get to that point, we need to get some Entro crystals, because Entro is a pretty big part of setting this all up. And to get Entro, we need Entro seeds. That's going to be some sand, some ender dust, redstone, glowstone, and skystone dust. Ender dust is just crushed ender pearls, and skystone dust is just crushed skystone. And then once we have our seeds, we need some Fluix blocks. And we're going to do 4 of those total. And then we're going to want to go ahead and craft some growth accelerators, because this will speed up the growth of anything that it's touching. And well, to get Entro, we're going to need these. And for now, we're just going to piggyback off this power. We're going to set up our growth accelerators right about here. And this should be good enough. So let's place our power on it. Then we're going to place our Fluix block here. And we'll place one there as well. And we're just going to do 2 at a time. Right click it with your Entro seed. That turns into a fully budding entronized Fluix block. I think I said that right. So then we're just going to want to wait until we hit the fully grown buds. And yeah, I believe we need about 32 of these. And make sure to use a fortune pick to speed this whole process up. And eventually they will turn it back into Certus quartz blocks once they're finished running, and that's why you want to make a couple of these. But even after just these 2 with a fortune 3 pick, I'm already at 42 and still able to get more out of this one. So I'm just going to use up what I have left to see what we end with after 4 of them. So after those 4 Entro seeds, we've got just over 2 stacks of Entro crystals, and we can use the reaction chamber to duplicate them. It's 32 Entro dust with 32 Fluix crystals to make 64. So we can do the exact same thing we've been doing with the rest of it to just keep this going. So in order to make sure that we never run out of Entro, Certus, or Fluix ever again, we need to put a pattern provider on our reaction chamber. So once again, we're just gonna kind of set this up over here, and we'll clean this all up later on. But for now, we have the reaction chamber down with the pattern provider. Just need to connect it to some power and then connect it up to our system. And with the device online, we can now start putting reaction chamber patterns into this pattern provider. So we already have our Certus quartz dust set up in the crusher. Now we'll go ahead and do the Certus quartz crystals. Be sure to pick the reaction chamber, set this up, and we're going to take the water out of here because we're going to feed water to it through a sink. So we just don't have to worry about that. We're going to want to set up charged Certus quartz. Want to set up some Fluix dust in our crusher, Fluix crystals in the reaction chamber, and we're going to use this recipe with the charged and the Fluix since we're just going to have an infinite amount of these anyway. We'll set up the Entro in the crusher, and then Entro crystals will be the 32 dust with the 32 Fluix crystals. We'll place these 4 patterns in the reaction chamber and then these 2 patterns in our crusher. So now that we have those set up in our pattern providers, we could come in here and start requesting this whenever we need it. But it's a bit better to have that in stock at all times versus constantly trying to deal with it and get it. We're going to make a machine called the ME Requester. And what this machine does is pretty great. Let's go ahead and turn all of these off by clicking over here. And then we can go ahead and take these different Certus quartz and dust and place them in here. So we're going to place this in here and we're going to tell this to keep in 64. And we're going to take Certus quartz and we're going to tell it to keep in 64. And then charge Certus quartz. And then we can go ahead and start turning all these on. And you're going to see them change different colors here. What this is going to do is when it's green, that means it's not doing any type of crafting. When it's yellow, it means it's crafting. And when it's red, that means it's missing ingredients. And generally speaking, when it says it's missing ingredients, it's because one of these other crafts are going, because they all use each other to constantly run. If we come down here and go to our crafting status at the top, we can see what it's trying to do. But before we do that, we need to make sure to set this up. So it's auto export over to the pattern provider, and we need to give this some water. And let's put our acceleration cards in here as well. So as we can see here, and our dust is going up a little bit, but it's we are currently above 64 on each of these. So we're actually going to go ahead and change this and set it to 256 on each. And now that we have started set up, we're going to do the exact same thing for Fluix and then for Intro. And also one of the things that we're going to want to do is for the reaction chamber, we want to come to the pattern provider for it and set this to blocking mode. So that way it'll only do one craft at a time, because if we leave that off, it'll start dumping in multiple things in here and it'll get stuck because it's not sure what it's supposed to do. So when first setting this up, I was a little wrong. You want to have your dust set up so that way when it's being crafted, it is only crafting one at a time. But when you put it in the ME requester, you set it up so the batch size is 64. If you do anything different, it gets a little wonky and it'll start just dumping stuff into the crusher and just kind of breaking this whole thing, and you know, you're running out of it. And also, as you're doing all of this, you want to make sure that you're doing each step at a time. So do all your Certus first. Once that's done, then go to your Fluix, because you're going to need Certus for that. And you want to make sure you have enough so you don't run out. And then once you're done your Fluix, you can come to your Intro setup, which will have to be in a second requester, and turn these on. And because doing Intro requires Fluix, you want to make sure that you're just stocked up on everything, so that way you don't run out. And then once you have all of your Fluix done, you can start turning on all of this to keep blocks in stock at all times. And that'll be extremely useful to have all of this in stock whenever you need it, at least 256 of them, to be able to start crafting all of the things that you need for Applied Energistics. But now that we have those set up, we have two other machines that we need to make: the circuit slicer and the crystal assembler. And these are going to be used to replace this setup. Because as nice as this is, it's rather slow. Where using the assembler and the slicer will increase the speed of making processors a ton. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is make the crystal assembler, and we need the extended machine frame, which requires Intro infused ingots. So let's go ahead and set up some patterns for that. And as we're setting all this up, we just want to make sure that we are going through each and every step and setting up an autocraft for every little thing that's throughout it. After a little bit of time, I have all these patterns set up, and every single one of these patterns in our inventory is used to craft the crystal assembler. But a lot of these are ones that we're going to use for a lot of other things. All stuff we're going to use, so moving forward, we don't have to worry about setting up these patterns because we're going to have them already. So let's go ahead and start dumping these into our pattern providers. And then we just need to make sure to put the Intro infused ingots into our reaction chamber here. Now if we come in here and we request our crystal assembler, we should have everything that we need, or we should be able to craft everything that we need to make it. And now at this point, since we already have our formation cores, our annihilation core, and our crafting table set up, we can make a pattern for our pattern provider. And now we can request our pattern provider and have it auto crafted. And before we start setting all of our, before we set up our crystal assembler, we're gonna go ahead and make some smart cables, and especially the dense smart cables, so that way we can kind of make sure that we have enough channels going out, because we're already starting to run out. We could start putting stuff connected to this, but I don't want to do that for now because it's just going to be ugly and take up room. When we have all this space, we might as well start setting it up how we want it to look. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and make our cables and place everything, and I'll be back in a second. And I'm done. Okay. That took a little longer than I expected, but just looking pretty good. So we have our crafting terminal and our pattern encoder here. I readjusted this so it's directly underneath. Probably not the best idea because that's some channels that we're losing out on here, but that's fine. This is running down to our storage bus, which is underneath here. I'll have to change that out then. And then over here is where we have our reaction chamber. We've got 4 towers for our pattern providers and our molecular assemblers, and 8 total of these CPUs running. And right now they're all 4K, but we can upgrade those later. Pattern provider here. Then we moved our furnace and our crusher over here. Another tower, more CPUs. And yeah, we're running dense cables and we're running all smart cables. So when you hover over them, it'll tell you how many channels are running on that cable. And yeah, we're just running a bunch of dense, which gives us 32 channels, into our regular smart cables, which give us 8 channels, just like the glass ones did. But we can actually see them now, and they light up based off of channels as well. And just all running throughout, everything's connected. If we right click on our controller, we can see that we are running all the right amount of channels for everything. So yeah, we're good to go, which means we can set up our crystal assembler, and we're going to place that right here. And then we just need to give that some power. So I think if we place this here, that should give, yeah, that'll give both of those power. So we'll take that one off for now. And we want to set the same thing up here where we auto export to the pattern provider. We want to set this to blocking mode. Then we want to make some patterns for it. And the first pattern that we're going to make for it is going to be the circuit slicer. And some of the things on the circuit slicer really don't need a pattern for it. That one thing being the stone cutter. So we're just going to craft one, throw it in our inventory. And then everything else is pretty much craftable. So we should just be able to make this pattern. Pop it into our crystal assembler and craft our slicer. We're missing the concurrent press. Let's see, the concurrent press is a silicone press with an intro and some eyes of ender in the crystal assembler. So let's go ahead and make that. Takes a little bit, but we can always put acceleration cards in here to speed it up. But we have our slicer. Before we set that slicer up, we're going to take these 2 patterns out, come back to our encoder, and place them back in here, clear them out, and hit the encode pattern, and they turn those back to blank patterns. So we don't just have those random patterns in there for no reason. Now we need to give our slicer some power, and we want to make sure to set that up just like the other AE systems with the blocking mode and the output configuration set up. And then if we take a look at our slicer, these are all the patterns that we can do with the slicer. And as you can see, if we put a block of Certus quartz in here, we get 4 printed calculation circuits. If we put a block of gold, we get 9 logic circuits. And if we put a block of diamond, we get engineering circuits, as well as a few other circuits that we aren't currently using yet, but you could always set up. And same thing with the block of silicon, we can get 9 printed silicon. And then with our crystal assembler, this is where we can start making things like entro infused ingots and our processors, as well as a few other extended AE machines that we'll get to later on. And while I was at it, I set up some patterns for a couple other things, like our extended pattern providers, our extended assemblers, and our extended drive, because these will speed up and allow for more patterns to be held in each one of these towers, which will make our life a little bit easier. And with those 2 machines set up, we now have access to all of the basics of autocrafting through Applied Energistics, and we can move forward with a ton of different machines in this mod that will further extend our crafting capabilities and our storage capabilities. I know this was a more technical episode with a lot of setup, but this is going to pay off very quickly for this mod pack, because now when we need to work on something, we can just set up patterns and keep moving forward with it. I apologize if this episode was all over the place, but this now means that moving forward, everything just got a whole lot easier. Next episode, we're going to jump into some better power because, well, we're going to need it. This is going to start sucking up a ton of power. And if we want to utilize Applied Energistics for autocrafting in rooms other than here, we're going to need some wireless to do so. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Later.